You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello and welcome along to the latest Today's Conveyancer podcast. Today I'm talking case management systems, practice management systems and technology with Redbrick Solutions founder Martin MacDuff. Martin, thank you very much indeed for joining the podcast.
It's a pleasure, David.
We're going to hear a little bit about your own journey in a second, because I'm interested. You've been going for about 20 years, you were saying, and you obviously got a lot of clients in the conveyancing market in particular. But we're also going to be talking around what's happening in this space, because it's quite an interesting and, for the first time in a long time, quite a dynamic space, I think it's fair to say. Case management and practice management does seem to be changing in a very positive way, I would suggest. But let's start with a little bit about yourself and some of the history of Redbrick, if you don't mind. Tell us about that journey.
Yeah, absolutely, David. I'm the founder and owner of Redbrick Solutions, and we provide easy-to-use conveyancing case management software for law firms in a nutshell. We're based in a little county called Rutland in the East Midlands, and we've got about 40 colleagues here, all of whom are focused on being the best technology provider to our target market. Our clients are dotted all over England and Wales, and they include some high street firms up to larger mid-tier conveyancing specialist organisations, the busier of which will undertake probably over 500 transactions a month. We've been running for about 20 years, so we know a little bit about the space and the market and the industry and how it operates.
Well, we're going to dive right into that, because I think it's fair to say you've been around for a little while. 20 years is a fair amount of time. What are the big changes that you're seeing happening in this space at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of very interesting changes and mostly positive as well. There's quite a bit of consolidation going on of suppliers. That does concern me a little bit, in that firms and their clients will soon have potentially a rather limited stable of suppliers to choose from. That said, as the number of firms is also falling, certainly on the high street, potentially it's less viable for software vendors to cater for all the nuances of the 10,000 or so law firms that existed on the high street, say a decade ago. The mid-tier remains our focus, and they tend to run their businesses in quite a different way to the high street. They're typically better resourced from an IT point of view. And they see good case management technology very much as integral to their business's success. Many of those mid-tier law firms want on-premise solutions for a whole host of reasons, and that works really well for us. As potentially the typically less tech-enabled high street firms seem to be leaning more towards cloud-based solutions at the minute, possibly because they don't have sort of existing robust infrastructure in place. But we cater for them as well, and our solution is published on Amazon's web services platform for those that want that flexibility.
Help me out, because sometimes some of this chat goes over my head. On-premise solutions, explain.
Well, on-premise is simply where the client would host the data themselves. So those firms would have typically something like a terminal server, and they can use that then for all of their users either within that single office. But some of our clients will host their own database, essentially. And the larger clients of ours will have sort of 10, 15 offices, all of which will run from one central place.
What's the benefit of that? Because my understanding was that particularly cloud was really part of this process of enabling a much more remote and flexible working practice.
Yeah, that's correct. And in theory, it does. Absolutely. What these larger firms will do is essentially they manage and run their own cloud. So it gives them the control, much more so. And there's functionality that you can get with essentially an on-premise solution, such as provided by Redbrick, which simply isn't achievable via cloud.
Give me an example, Martin.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of examples, David. Some of these will be to do with integrations with other partners, back office solutions, typically account providers. Many of those will be on premise. So we integrate tightly with a number of those providers. There's functionality and integration with things like Outlook, which is increasingly important for law firms, all of which is best achieved and delivered via an on-premise solution.
You've alluded to the fact that the mid-tier in particular has invested quite heavily in technology over the past couple of years. Why do you think that is? Why has it suddenly been that there's been this need to invest in technology?
I think law firms have very much understood that to run a successful business, they need to invest in technology as being one of the key sort of cornerstones, I suppose, of having a profitable and viable business. They're better placed to do that because it can be expensive. Typically, running a cloud-based solution offers lots of flexibility for firms. They can increase their headcount very easily. They just spin up a new session, a new user. So deployment potentially is a little bit easier for firms. But these larger mid-tier firms, that they will have IT managers and IT teams, all of whom will be able to manage that infrastructure for them very successfully and arguably more cost effectively across their business, and they retain the control of that service as well, which is important for a lot of those mid-tier firms.
And typically, what level of investment are you seeing these firms make? I mean, is it 5 figures? Is it 6 figures? Is it 7 figures?
It will really vary, David, depending on the size of the firm. I mean, I think best practice would indicate that firms should typically be spending, 3, 4, 5% of their turnover into technology generally, but that would be across a whole range of services and hardware.
And it would be very difficult to talk about technology and case and practice management systems without talking about some of the cyber risk that's associated with that. It's a real buzz topic, isn't it? You must be seeing a big increase in the risks that firms face, and how are you tackling that as an organization?
Well, we work very closely with all of our clients in terms of their requirements. It is a big challenge for law firms, and I think certainly the quality and quantity of data that law firms hold is obviously of value. Certainly, conveyancers have faced a lot of challenges with by the redirection of funds. The sums involved in conveyancing are substantial, and there have been, unfortunately, some well-reported cases where law firms have been defrauded out of money. So yeah, there's lots of things that they can do to tighten up their security. There's some good services there with regards to some of the organisations we work with, such as LMS, for example, who provide a bank account check service for law firms to make sure that the money's going to the right place at the right time.
And is that what case management systems can do? I mean, you must have checks and balances in your workflows.
Yeah, absolutely. So importantly, at the right point in the transaction when funds are about to be transferred, Redbrick has a very good integration with LMS, and what that allows the law firm to do is just have that final check to make sure that the bank account details of the recipient firm are valid and accurate. Yeah, so that's important because this is where at the last minute, there's a change of bank details either from the client side or from where the proceeds of sale are going, or the purchase monies can get redirected. So yeah, law firms are being put under a lot of pressure. So importantly for Redbrick and Redbrick's clients, we try and make it as easy as possible for them to remain compliant and make sure funds don't get misplaced.
We're going to talk about digital conveyancing in a second. Perhaps it's a loaded question, Martin, I don't know, but of the firms that you're dealing with, that Redbrick deals with, how many of your users are qualified conveyancers? How many of your users are legal execs and paralegals? And therefore, how much are they reliant upon the workflow that you're producing? Computer says no, computer says yes, that kind of directive.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question, David, and that varies dependent on the size of the firm. So Redbrick provide a very customizable solution. So whilst we grew up on the high street, we spent probably our first 10 years dealing almost exclusively with high street firms. What we're finding in dealing with the mid-tier, our experiences are telling us that these are businesses that are run in a very different way. Certainly to the high street. They will adopt a much more almost manufacturing approach, I suppose, to their conveyancing. And the work that those people within those businesses undertake is very clearly marked out. They'll have teams of people simply opening files, and that is their responsibility. So those would tend not to be necessarily qualified conveyancers, but they would be experienced in getting all of the relevant data from the client at the start of the transaction. At the relevant point, those businesses then are handing those files over to fee earners, who are obviously the qualified individuals. They're doing as much as they can on the particular file, but importantly at the key stages, these would typically be, from the law firm's point of view, the more expensive resource to employ. So they handle the file, I suppose, at the key stages, and things like post-completion tasks are more easily then handed over to experienced individuals, but not necessarily qualified individuals. What you tend to find on the high street is that the fee earner is more involved in the whole file from start to finish. But the larger law firms are able to split that work out, because it's not necessary to have a qualified fee earner or solicitor opening a matter. It's just not viable for them.
No, and dare I ask, I mean, do you see that that's something that will change in conveyancing? And do you think it's something that case management systems actually have a part to play in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's probably been the case for quite some time, David, in truth, that the work has been segmented out. Law firms have understood that they don't need qualified solicitors to open matters and to produce letters and documents and forms and these sorts of things. Case management does lend itself very well to that, or certainly good case management does. And there's lots of tasks within Redbrick that can be assigned to the appropriately qualified and or experienced individual. So that allows our firms, gives them a competitive advantage in making sure that the right people are dealing with the right elements of the transaction from the law firm's point of view. And the supervision that a good case management system can give you is unparalleled as well. So the visibility that the practice manager or the head of department has over all those files is absolutely key. What we tend to find in these larger mid-tier firms is that they tend to manage their business almost by exception, I suppose. So of the 500 files that they will open in a month, they really want to know about the 25 where they might be proceeding beyond a certain point but haven't got monies on account from the client or haven't got their terms of business back. And the case management product will just surface that very easily. And that's not just at the start of the transaction, that's at all the key milestones as well, right through to the end of the transaction where, for example, they've dealt with the completion but are yet to settle the SDLT fee if it was due. And they're then most interested in looking at those that fall outside the scope of the file being dealt with in a timely fashion.
Thinking about this phrase digital conveyancing, I'm really interested in your thoughts coming at it from a case management point of view, because we're in a scenario, and I don't think anybody can deny the fact that despite the proliferation of technology, the conveyancing transaction seems to have either become more complicated or has certainly lengthened. I mean, we're talking at the moment, and it's currently sort of 20 weeks, something like that. What, in your view, as a case management provider, is going wrong or going right? Because the whole point of the workflow, for example, was to try and speed that process, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And what we've observed, I suppose, in the 20 odd years that we've been in the space is that the process of conveyancing necessarily hasn't proceeded any much quicker. But the reality is, of course, David, that lots of those firms have so much more work and obligations, compliance, regulatory, etc., to undertake. And that includes things like AML checks. That includes source of funds and source of wealth being a newer requirement that falls upon them, and there's greater levels of obligation with regards to the lender, etc. So whilst the law firm has to do more, it's hardly a surprise that the timescales involved haven't necessarily improved. What the law firms do is they try and operate all of those things as efficiently as possible and deal with them, in the quickest possible way. When we go and first visit a law firm, there's very rarely anything fundamentally wrong with how they're doing the conveyancing, far from it. What we try and do is we'll try and save them, X minutes up front, another 10 minutes here, another 15 minutes on another task, 5 minutes on that, which in total amounts to some significant time savings for the law firm. What we can't do, obviously, is make the whole process fundamentally quicker, because there will be people in the chain that are involved. And obviously, ultimately, you can only work at the pace of the slowest. So there's lots of things that affect the timescales involved in conveyancing. There's lots of new initiatives such as BASPI, which tries to bring more information to surface that for everybody involved at the start of the transaction. That could and arguably should reduce the timescales. But of course, that work's then happening earlier in the process. I'm not necessarily sure that the overall timescales involved will be significantly improved. It should offer benefits to reducing fall throughs because people will have more information up front. But from the point where the consumer first decides that they want to sell a property or buy a property to actually getting in hasn't improved significantly.
I guess really all we've done to date is digitization. We've only really changed the way in which, for example, the protocol forms are completed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There are lots of initiatives out there, and Redbrick, among others in the market, are trying to do as much as we can digitally. This makes it more efficient for the law firm. It makes it more engaging and more efficient for the consumer, the client, the home mover as well. They can now almost onboard themselves in many cases. The technology does exist for law firms to consume data straight from the client or from portals, from introducers of work, from a whole range of sources. And in fact, Redbrick also offers unattended services. And by that, I mean the client could essentially list a transaction either themselves or via an introducer on either our portal or one of our partner portals. That information could be consumed by the case management product that the law firm's running. That would then furnish the client with a quote. That quote would then be accepted by the customer and returned. This could all be over the weekend or of an evening out of hours. It's unattended. It's not quite artificial intelligence, but it's certainly assisted intelligence. And that would then result in a situation where the lawyer could come in on a Monday morning, and they could have had a whole number of new instructions over the weekend. Client packs have been sent out, terms of business have been sent out, been accepted and returned by the client, and then they could just start handling the work. So making it much more efficient for everybody involved in the process, really. So there's lots of exciting things going on.
I've got two questions around that, so you have to bear with me. One is another loaded question. Are firms engaged in using technology? Do you sense that you're talking to organizations that really want to improve the way that they're delivering service?
I absolutely do. Yeah. I mean, over the 20 years that we've been operating in the space, I think initially when we started, David, people fell into probably one of three camps. They had some technology in place, and if they were happy with it, they would continue to use it. Some firms at the time would have invested in technology and it hadn't worked for them. And I think service providers over the time that we've been in the market have definitely improved their game. But those who'd invested very heavily, remembering that most case management systems come with quite a substantial investment up front to get the product installed and up and running. And there were those firms who had potentially considered it and just thought it was too expensive and not looked. Redbrick came to market with a slightly different business model. So we have a comparatively low entry cost to get involved with our product, and thereafter we charge transactionally for each particular matter that the law firm lists on. And what that means then is that law firms can more easily get involved with case management and get the benefits of that. And in most cases, David, actually, our clients are also passing the transaction fee onto the consumer as a disbursement, which means there's no P&L hit for the use of our technology. They're able to do that because the client uses all the products and services that they're able to then engage with, whether that's something as simple as receiving text message updates at the key milestone stages, whether that's looking online at their progress, whether that's filling out the forms, the transaction forms, contracts, etc. online, digitally signing those and returning them into the law firm via our website. So there's lots of things going on, all of which offer an enhanced service, I suppose, for the consumer, but most importantly, efficiency gains for the law firm as well. And that workflow that you mentioned as well is also very much about assisting the law firms, not just in trying to complete the transaction more quickly, but also making sure that they've dealt with all of their regulatory and compliance obligations as well, making sure that nothing gets overlooked.
So my second question is, what percentage of your software actually gets used by the conveyancer? Because if I think about my phone, for example, I probably use about 10% of the functionality of the phone.
It varies from firm to firm. Every firm is different, and despite the fact they would all say they do conveyancing, and they do, many of them will do it in a slightly different way. So what we're able to do is to look into the firm's processes as we're deploying our case management product, and we make sure that we try and save them those little snippets of time at each and every task that they do. We do have good MI built into the back of our product that allows us to see where people are spending time and what they're doing, which is really useful. And some of those firms are really interested in working with us to understand where the time gets spent as well, because that obviously helps them understand where the pain points are in the conveyancing process. If they're spending too long doing a particular task, then we work very closely with our clients individually, but also via things like user groups, and we've got a product development fee board that we publish, a feedback board, and that allows them to list development requests. So we very much work with them to make sure that what we do is delivering benefit. It's a fear that we have as a business that if we don't deliver good quality product, then essentially we'll become irrelevant. So it's absolutely essential that we understand where those pain points lie for our customers in the process, and we work with them to see how technology can overcome those challenges and those problems.
Where do you see hold-ups then? You've suggested that you can kind of identify typically, and you've got a huge amount of data to work with. Where typically do you see hold-ups in the transaction?
It varies throughout. I mean, lots of the interactions with the customer used to provide quite a big break in the conveyancing process. So initially, things like onboarding, that's a big challenge for firms to get all of the relevant information out of the client or clients. This is data about themselves, their transaction, their financials, etc. So what we've built over the last couple of years is some online questionnaires and data capture. Essentially, that allows the law firm, very simply, having received either a request for a quote or a confirmation of instruction, the law firm can then direct their clients to fill in all this information online, and they can do that via a phone, tablet, PC, whatever. They can do that evenings, weekends, on the phone, traveling to work if they want to, and then that data comes straight back into the case management product. So things like onboarding, that was a big barrier for lots of firms. It was taking a lot of time, a lot of administrative time, but also days in the process. That can now be discharged very easily and very efficiently using good tech.
There's this talk of the Amazon culture pervading legal services. Mm-hmm. Do you see that again? Do you see within your systems that customers are quicker to respond, and do you see their frustrations in what they might perceive as a slow response from their conveyancer?
Yeah, I think that is an issue. I mean, there's an expectation now of service in life generally. Amazon culture, as you call it, has put quite a bit of pressure, I suppose, on firms. People drop an email and expect an instant reply. And it's just unreasonable to expect that. So what we try and assist our customers in doing is being proactive in that regard. All of the updates that a client would expect on a case, the product will send the client text message updates. It will send them email alerts. They can go in and find out exactly what's happening on their transaction at any particular time at their convenience, evenings, weekends, when the law firm aren't even open. And most importantly, that information is also provided to the introducer, the source of the work, the estate agents, and everybody else involved in the transaction. So the visibility is there. But of course, what you can't change is people's attitude to this. They simply want to email or call the conveyancer and ask for an update. So in a lot of cases, we try and encourage our firms to be proactive and furnish those updates at their convenience rather than having to field those calls and emails coming in.
No update is an update. That's something I've learned recently.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in a lot of cases, just keeping the clients well informed as to what's gone on is enough. Even if there's nothing for the law firm to particularly report, just to say, look, we've chased this, we've dealt with that, we're pursuing something else. Just keeping the client informed. I think that's the issue that most home movers have, is the lack of transparency. The reality is, David, most people probably move 4 or 5 times in their life, something like that. So it's not something that they are experienced in dealing with, and they find that lack of visibility, that potentially down to their lack of understanding of the process and how it works and what goes on, is an issue. But law firms can and are being proactive in helping their customers understand what the next steps are, what they're waiting on, and how their matter's proceeding.
You've suggested you've got this history in the high street, that you're now working with these mid-sized firms. You're obviously dealing with people that are engaged in improving their service levels, engaged in technology, improving efficiency, essentially protecting their future. But there are still a lot of law firms out there that are not particularly engaged. How do we get that message across? Because as you rightly point out, you're only ever as quick as the slowest part of the chain.
There's no reason why any law firm shouldn't review their systems. We typically find that they do so probably every 5 years as a matter of routine, and we encourage that for our existing clients as well, to make sure that they benchmark what Redbrick are providing them with what else is available in the market. As we said at the start, David, there's very low barriers to entry, certainly as far as Redbrick are concerned. So within an hour, we can really show people how they can improve their service, increase their levels of compliance or visibility of that compliance, and run a demonstrably more efficient and therefore more profitable transaction for them. People will make a well-informed decision as to what's right for them. Redbrick isn't for everybody, far from it. There are plenty of good case management systems out there, although the number is reducing due to some of the consolidation that we spoke about earlier. But there's plenty of good, affordable technology that law firms can engage with very easily. So I would encourage every law firm to have a look at what's out there.
And that review time frame is coming down, isn't it? I mean, I go back 10 years, it was 13, 14, 15 years from memory was the time a case management system was in place. It's now much more frequent that firms are looking at changing, isn't it?
It is. I think they're more able and better informed as well about what's out there. I think the pace at which technology is moving is always accelerating. So there's a lot more on offer for law firms. But of course, it's important that we remember as well that there's increasing regulation and obligations on all of those law firms as well. So whilst they probably do review more regularly than they would have done a generation ago, there's lots of things that Redbrick and other case management providers need to do to make sure that their products and services remain relevant and attractive.
So how are you ensuring that you're staying relevant and attractive and all the rest of it? What are the sort of main developments that you're making within Redbrick?
Yeah, well, developments tend to fall into one of I suppose a handful of categories. There are things that are now technically possible that weren't previously. So we've always got one eye on just what technology is out there, and how that relates to our client market. So we're looking at what's essentially what's possible, bit of sort of stargazing, I suppose. There are things that drive our development. Most importantly, obviously, our customers drive our development. So as I've said already, David, we engage with our customers by way of product development boards that we publish, and they get to rank and vote on those items. And as a result, the things that they really want to see come to market come to fruition. And we engage with our clients by way of user groups and all of the site visits that we have. So we're lucky in that we have a team of really good, let's call them account managers, I suppose, who revisit all of our customers on a regular basis. And they do so to make sure that the customer is getting the most out of using our technology. And as we've already said, different firms will use it in different ways. That's one of the beauties, I suppose, of a flexible product such as ours. But all of that feedback then gets consumed by our business, and we then make sure that we continue to build functionality that is really relevant and on the money for law firms.
What I sense is that the last 2 years have been hellish, for want of a better word, for conveyancers, and that has stifled innovation. It's not stifled innovation from the suppliers, because there's a huge amount of innovation out there, but it's stifled innovation in firms because they simply haven't had the time to invest or even to look. Do you see that 2023 could be a year where law firms actually have the opportunity to innovate and invest?
I think it's interesting, David. I would almost disagree with you on the I suppose the underlying part of that question. I think law firms have been very innovative in terms of how they've responded during COVID. They've certainly looked at their working processes and practices and how they can run them in a different way, and that's allowed lots of law firms then really to reevaluate, I suppose, what had become just a very well established routine for them. I think 2023 will be interesting. The last 2 years have been really, really busy, and lots of law firms have struggled with the volumes. The staff are almost overworked. That's a big issue for a lot of law firms at the minute, and a period of quiet, which we're probably sat in now, just seems to be starting. I think volumes are dipping slightly for a couple of reasons. Cost of living crisis starting to bite. Obviously, there's been some financial ripples throughout the last couple of months as a result of some misguided budgeting by the government. But in any event, all of these things are a catalyst for change. And as long as that change is for good, then I think law firms will continue to thrive, and those that engage in technology, just being one of the things that they need to contemplate, obviously, in terms of running a successful business and continuing to grow. Certainly very much looking forward to 2023. We've got lots of exciting things going on for our customers, and we're working with some really good partners as well to help deliver a much more efficient, joined up transaction for everybody involved.
I'm ever so pleased in a lot of ways you've disagreed with that final question, Martin, because that's reassuring from my point of view, because I do worry that innovation has been stifled, but I'm heartened by your thoughts. So thank you very much, Nick, for sharing them. It's been great to have you on the podcast. Really interesting to chat and hear it from a case management provider's point of view. I don't think we've really had anybody on the podcast that's talking about it from a slightly different point of view, from a provider's point of view in that sense. So thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure, David. It's been great talking with you.
The Today's Conveyancer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysconveyancer.co.uk. My thanks to Martin. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.